a down. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. The tribulation in the ghetto is a must. Never qualify.
Hey.
Just come lose all of my money in a cash box. But me know say me a born Jamaican.
Yes, people, right now. Once again, we have the one and only Richard Rowe joining us. Okay, we're going to be speaking about so many different topics, so many different things happening and going on. Okay, big shout out to all those who've been locking in, sending me lots of love, lots of blessings. And of course, you're locked into the big bad station, arawakradio.com. Right now, we're going to be live and direct. Okay, so, and of course, it's all about Prisoners of Belief, the great book by Richard Rowe. So if you ever get a chance or opportunity when it comes out to buy the book, please do so. So Richard, are you there?
I certainly am.
How are you today?
I'm good. I've got slight bronchitis, so if I burst into a cough, you'll have to forgive me till I recover and join you again.
No problem. I hope you feel better very, very soon.
Okay, thank you.
So, of course, explain a little bit about yourself. If people haven't heard you before, let them know a little bit about who you are and why you wrote the book.
Okay, right. Well, my name is Richard Rowe. I'm a local person, white, old, retired, worked as an accountant in industry all my life. All my family are white. And we are truly, I've lived in Coventry about 50 years, so we're truly local people. The reason I wrote the book is because I was doing some work assisting various charities. The main one was Coventry Refugee Centre.
Yeah.
And the Belgrade Theatre wanted stories from migrants. And for various reasons, it never really happened. So I had a lunatic moment and decided I would write a story. The reason is, we're all bombarded with information these days,
yeah.
And within that you get a wide spectrum of opinions on every single subject, and it's very, very confusing. I thought there must be things which are fundamentally true, which are important, and that apply to all of us. And I tried to put this in a single document, which then gives an overview.
Okay.
And I did that in the form of a story. So that's how it arrived.
Okay. Wow. So you know what the next question has got to be. What is it that you want to discuss tonight? I know we're going to be talking lots of different topics throughout the year, but what is it you want the listeners to hear about today?
Okay. I'd like to talk about why history is important, and in explaining the way the world is today,
okay.
And then to give people ideas to think about, to review their own belief systems as to how relevant they are to their future. So, for example, everything we have today is the product of nature and also the previous efforts of societies from people we don't know, either because they're too far away, or from people who made a contribution to humanity decades or centuries ago.
Yeah.
And that's extremely important in explaining where we are today. What it doesn't do, though, and it's very important to understand this, it doesn't tell you what you need to do for the future. It gives you an understanding. So, for example, starting off with fundamentals, all this is in my stories, Prisoners of Beliefs. Why do we live together in ever larger groups? And the reason is we start off in a family group. We then have a group of families. We have a village, then we have a town, and then we have a city, and then we have a country.
Yeah.
Each one of those stages is more productive than the other. So a town is more productive than a village, and a city is more productive than a town.
Okay.
So we continually gravitate into ever larger groups. Now, when you start to look at that, you then start to look at, well, what are these groups? What are the organisation structures? And interestingly, these structures are pretty similar all over the world and over all time periods, irrespective of what the organisation is. So, for example, they all have a leader. It's usually an individual, can be a committee, but that's very uncommon. This is very important for decision-making processes, so that the group can then function, It can decide roles, it can allocate roles, and it can control things. In order to do that, you need rules, and the rules that explain for each individual within the group what you have to do and what you can't do. Now, this is true whether you're a government, whether you're a religious organisation, whether you're a social organisation. And these rules are justified with beliefs. So what I then look at is, on what basis do people believe what they believe, and how well rooted is that in reality, i.e. in the facts, and to what extent is that going to give them what they need going forward into the future?
Yeah.
And when you start to look at that, you find actually things become much simpler. So, for example, you have a range of organisations, looking at two very briefly. You've got democracies and dictatorships. Now, in a democracy, you have a choice. Each individual is respected. The rules are stated within the society. A lot of the rules are made up to protect the individual, but over and above that is to protect the group.
Yeah.
Because by protecting the group, you then protect the individuals within the group. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're a member of the mafia or the Church of England or a Tory.
Yeah.
You operate on a very similar basis. Now, dictatorships are very different. And they are usually controlled by an individual, and the individual then has absolute power. And I'm just going to quote a little bit from my book,
Okay.
Because it explains it. The techniques used by dictators to manipulate followers form a depressingly familiar pattern. First, the group has to feel under threat. This is often real, but can be manufactured, particularly if an autocrat has control of the information sources, and is why modern dictators always want to control television, newspapers, radio, the internet, movement of people, etc.
Yeah.
Examples are Hong Kong at the moment with the Chinese government, Putin in Russia, Lenin in Russia, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, Xi Jinping in China, Hitler in Germany, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, etc., etc., etc. This creates one controllable source of information and blanks out alternatives, and is a constant danger within all societies, including the West. And that's a very key important point. We are not above this. You've only got to look at Germany as a democratic country now,
Yeah.
but in fact succumbed to Hitler. And the Japanese is a democratic country now, but in fact they carried out the most appalling war crimes. So this is a danger within all of us.
Yeah.
And it depends on our thought processes and the organisations we join. Second, there has to be a target enemy. It can be Jews, Americans, Muslims, Tutsi, whites, capitalists, Arabs, communists, black people, black imperialists, Rohingya, whatever. It doesn't matter who they are, as long as they're perceived as different from the people that the dictator purports to defend.
Yeah.
The target can be moved to whatever the dictator desires, provided there is a plausible explanation and the power to carry out his wishes. This is very important in empire building. The real target is anyone who stands in the way of the dictator.
Okay.
And third, this perceived difference must depict the target as subhuman, so that emotions can be detached from the suffering caused by the perpetrators. The dominant group often portray these actions as virtuous and heroic, and that's true in all societies, including the British, and we as individuals are capable of this.
Yeah.
So it's a danger we need to understand. In terms of understanding our history,
Yeah.
Africans often don't understand. There aren't many Africans who actually understand their own history. If you look at the history of Africa, it's nearly always been independent, apart from when the Europeans went in there and then conquered these territories in order to get the materials that they needed to build their empires up. In the same way, Europeans only know half of their history, and I mean, I grew up, and I was born in 1950. We just won the Second World War, and there were lots of films at Hollywood about all the heroics, about D-Day and Dunkirk and the Blitz, and lots of things. But it's only half a story. In the same way as when we had an empire, we then saw the resources we were taking out, and we felt pretty good about ourselves. Well, we built railways across India and halfway across Africa, and we've done lots of things. The reality is that, firstly, this was done for the Europeans for their own advantage, and it also, in terms of our values these days, had almost no benefit for the people who lived there.
Yeah.
And the way we then reinforce this is through our stories down, whatever they are. Everybody who tells you a story is telling you something to influence you in some way. It may be you need to be a Christian because of whatever. You need to support British independence and Brexit. It doesn't matter what it is. They're telling you a story for their own purposes.
Yeah.
This is then reinforced in many forms. The written word throughout literature, music, art, in many things. And this becomes part of your culture. So that's an overview, very general. I can get a lot more specific than that.
Yeah. So which stories are you thinking are untrue or cause damage, or stories that are positive as well? Which ones do you think?
Well, there must be truths that we can all agree on. And that's the fundamental belief. It's not a question of I'm on this side and somebody else is on another side. It's a question of if something is fundamentally true, it should be accessible to everybody, and there should be evidence to support it. There are many examples where we accept stories and we just follow them 100%.
Yeah.
So you can be, a devout Muslim, a devout Christian, a devout capitalist, whatever. But if you follow that blindly 100%, then you deny your own mental process of examining the alternatives. I mean, for example, the belief, what all people tend to do, they look at, they decide what they want to do, and then they justify it. And in justifying it, you then have to put reasons forward, and those reasons are often rubbish, or they're partially true, but they're a distortion of the truth. So, for example, white people put out the idea that they had an innate superiority over other people.
Yeah.
This is not only wrong, it's dangerous. And if you believe that, you will then not. One of the reasons that is a major problem is because if you are completely dependent on other people outside of your immediate society, you need their cooperation. If you then have a preconception that somehow they're inferior, that you are right and that they are wrong and you can do what you want, that is no way to get what you need, which is absolutely essential for your own survival. And that's true of the British, and that's true of many empires. None of the empires are all good or all bad. History cannot be changed, and one of the dangers of focusing exclusively on history is it polarizes opinions. So, for example, if you think slavery was bad, and these days we think it's appalling, if you then have a white person and a non-white person, they can polarize and draw conclusions about the other person without ever knowing that individual. And unless you can talk with them and cooperate with them, how are you, either of you, going to move forward? And that impacts very much today on the obligations, and we need to look at the facts and review why we have those opinions.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, for example, Slavery is horrendous. And there are arguments about, well, the Africans had slavery before, and in parts of Africa there's still slavery today.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the white people, when they went over there, they had this detachment. These people were less than human, and we need them to do what we need to do for our own benefits, and therefore we can mistreat them without any sort of conscience whatsoever. Now, the white people, when Africans had slaves, they were second-class citizens, but they lived in a society, and they sometimes married, etc. And they may have been lower class, but they integrated.
Yeah.
When the white people then went to Africa and took 12 million people over to the West Indies, 1.5 million died in transit, and the way they were treated when they got there was out of all proportion to the way Africans did that. And they detached their emotions and then came up with reasons why this was okay.
Yeah.
But you can't take today's values, and more importantly, today's information, which is in the public domain, and then apply it to past periods and draw modern morality judgments. So, for example, if you go back to 1805, slavery was, the trading of slaves was made illegal through the British Parliament.
Yeah.
Now, in 1805, my family were in Manchester. They worked in the cotton mills. They worked under dangerous conditions. They had no civil rights. Children would get injured. People would die. They couldn't vote. It was absolutely horrendous. Now, we weren't living in the lap of luxury. We were suffering from the same sort of attitudes that, say, the upper class, the aristocracy would have about the working class in this country.
Yeah.
If you look at Wales, Wales was another territory conquered by the British or the English, and Cardiff had the biggest port. Wales had the biggest lime mining and slate mining in the world, and it was a colony. Scotland was fairly similar. Today we have more information, but we need to learn it. Okay. And once you've learnt it, you're no longer innocent, and then you're responsible for your actions. Okay. One of the things that I hope in the Prisoners of Beliefs is that it opens up people's ideas to alternatives, and it gives them some factual basis to review what they believe and why they believe it. And if you then start to change your beliefs, you then almost inevitably start to change your actions, and that's what we need. To my mind, the biggest crime today is inequality and ignorance of the evidence, and that's true throughout the world, through most populations, but it's becoming less true.
Okay.
Now, there's a huge danger. In destroying the old, it can allow worse alternatives. A very good example of that is the Russian Revolution. Okay. And that was in October 1917. The old Tsar in Russia did not do the right things to protect his own people. There were legitimate complaints, which were very serious, that were never dealt with by him or anybody under him. And as a result of that, it enabled other people to make the statement that we need a revolution. Now, Lenin led the original revolution, and as soon as he got power, he then wiped out all competition. So he had absolute power. Yeah. Now, that is, unfortunately, that is also true of many African countries today. Okay. I'll just quote another bit from my book. A cynical pattern started with the Ghanaian president, Nkrumah, who was repeated many times, an appeal to the common citizen, promising an opportunity of participation in government, followed by fear of the exercise of citizenship and repression. There was little incentive for those in power to create a broader business community which might challenge the existing elite. In Nigeria, oil, employing very few people, and many of them foreign, ruined cocoa as the state elite jealously guarded the national resources and turned against the power base of the cocoa producers, resulting in Nigeria becoming more dependent on oil exports for government revenue and foreign exchange. 70% of Nigeria's total national income comes from oil.
Yeah.
Now, that is one example in Africa. There are loads. And I'll give you the insane. Nigeria exports its oil, which it gets its revenue from, but it doesn't have the processing capacity to transfer that into diesel and petrol and other oil products. So they then buy the finished product back from the West at 10 times the price. Complete insanity.
Yeah.
Now, people need to understand that. There's a Nigerian billionaire, Dangote, who's building his own oil refinery where he hopes to supply Nigeria's needs. That's absolutely the right path to go down in some ways, but if it means that he then becomes a multi-billionaire and that the Nigerian population aren't any better off, then that's obviously a massive limitation. So the danger is if you tear down what we've got because you don't like it for whatever reason, what replaces it is not necessarily better.
Yeah.
And there are lots of examples in Africa, not just in Africa, but in many parts of the world where you destroy things. And one of the key things that we need to be aware of is the democratic right is our voice in society. If we believe some minority groups and you believe everything is corrupt, you disbelieve all the facts, and you don't look at reality, you can replace that with something much worse.
Yeah.
In my story, the African hero, a guy called Carl, comes over to this country and he goes to Liverpool for a Home Office interview. And there he meets two supercilious white young people who ask him very stupid questions. Yeah. And he finds it impossible to answer because the questions are not relevant. And I've interviewed some people. I've met them as friends, etc. Yeah. And they said, they've read that scene and they say, it is very much like that. He comes out and then he meets two other Africans from a different country, and they are revolutionaries. They hate the West. They want to destroy the West, and they try and recruit him so that he will then be. It will increase their power to do what they want. Yeah. And Carl rejects this, and he feels rejected by the Home Office. He's rejected by these fellow Africans. And life is very, very tough for him, and there's some scenes there. But in my story, it's not all. I've given a lot of facts, a lot of evidence, which can be checked out. But it's not all like that. I mean, there's a love story in there. Yeah. There are human situations. There are people helping other people. There's a Polish guy who comes over, and he lives in a house with 9 other people in a 3-bedroom house, and he has a friend, and the friend is abused by his employer. He himself works in a car wash where he gets cash in hand, and it's just enough to survive on. Yeah. And his friend goes down the toilet, and he gives up. He drinks Polish lager. To begin with, and then he starts on drugs because of the hours he's working and to keep him going. And in the end, there's a very sad scene which upset me a lot in writing it, where they meet for the last time in a cafe, and his friend is then homeless and his life's fallen apart. He's got a picture of his girlfriend. I found that very difficult to write. Yeah, definitely. But with what I'm saying is, we need to have an understanding of where we are today, but then we need a separate process of decision making to say, where do we go forward? Yeah. the answer is not to replicate the old as if it's okay.
Yeah.
And this applies to everybody who's British, everybody who's a migrant, everybody who's an asylum seeker. You need to stand up for the values that we then try and support today.
Yeah.
A last bit I'd like to just look at. This is an article in the Times, page 38, and it came out on the 1st of Jan. And it's about a factory that employs lots of people under disgusting conditions, and this is completely supported by the West. And to my mind, this is the biggest economic slaves today, is one of the very biggest subjects that exist. And this is, I'm quoting from the article. For weeks, workers battled wave after wave of illness as they toiled to build iPhones destined for customers around the world. Last month, 150 workers who had dinner at the Apple factory near Chennai, southeast India, were taken to hospital with vomiting and diarrhea and suffering from dysentery. The camps house an estimated 15,000 workers. Foxconn, the biggest private employer in China, and Apple, the world's most valuable company, are the people who run this system.
Yeah.
They sent over a reporter, said the 19-year-old female worker told of windowless dormitories housing up to a dozen people with no access to water or sanitation, for working for long hours for £100 a month. They were served with rotting vegetables and weevil-infested rice prepared in rat-infested outdoor kitchens overflowing with rubbish. In a room where more than 5 people can't sleep, 15 of us sleep on the floor. We stick to one another. Water is opened for us all. Water is opened for us only 1.5 hours before our shift. If you don't save water for later, we cannot use the toilets. Now, that is economic slavery.
Yeah.
That is affecting hundreds of millions of people. And if you have an iPhone or a mobile phone, or you shop in Primark, or you shop in any of the supermarkets in this country, indirectly you are supporting this economic system. And that is, if you give people economic freedom, they will then have the ability to seize their political freedom.
Yeah.
If you have no economic freedom, you don't have any political freedom, because you do things that you have to do, whether you like them or not.
Definitely. Wow. You know what?
I mean, those are quite shocking.
Yeah.
But they're factual, they're true, and they impact on all our lives. And this is what we need to be aware of.
Definitely, I agree 100%. Once again, Richard, I wanted to say thank you. You know, you've come on, you spoke again with lots of truth, lots of facts, and I wanted you to let the people know, when will your book be out and how can they get your book?
It will be out. I've made a commitment to the printers. It will be out first week of February.
Okay.
And it will be on a website that I will create, but I hope it's in Waterstones, the bookshop. It will almost certainly be on Amazon, so that and I will be distributing it in various locations, charities and bookshops in Coventry. So I hope it will be available. In terms of other subjects, there are other subjects I'd like to delve into. One of them is capitalism.
Okay.
Another one is biodiversity, and another one is religion. So you can imagine these are fairly contentious things, but they're factually based.
Yeah.
But they do challenge the beliefs that we hold dear and we live by habitually.
Definitely. Wow, we've got loads more conversations to have then. Definitely agree with that.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Anytime. I hope you feel better soon. We'll speak again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheers.
No worries. Bye-bye. Bye. Yes, people, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you took it in, had a listen. And of course, the book is called Prisoners of Belief. It's a great piece of work, great piece that Richard has done. And of course, when it comes out, please do go out there, support him, go and show him some love, okay, and appreciation. Once again, we're taking you back to Vibes Cartel.
I can't believe it. Government want to move me. I turn refugee in my own country. But a long time, me live here so can't go no way. Them really take poor people for food. Them really take poor people for food. Oh, it's a Babylon. Where you get that system you're from? Boy, those are down poor people land. John no seminar vote again, no sir.